She never took a physics class. She didn't even go to school most days. But with a cracked violin case in a street corner, she solved a sound problem Juilliard's faculty hadn't cracked in 80 years. The first person to notice was a retired acoustics professor. The second was the concert hall her mother used to mop every morning. Every afternoon, as the light fell in long gold sheets across Lincoln Center Plaza, a small girl with a chipped violin case took her place near the fountain. Her name was Liana. She was 12, slight of frame, calloused fingers, a quiet face that rarely smiled unless she played. The tourists never noticed the badge pinned inside her coat, a faded photo ID from the Department of Sanitation. Her mother cleaned the rehearsal halls at Juilliard every morning before sunrise, scrubbing the floors where cellists practiced and sopranos warmed up their voices against mirrors. Once, Liana asked her what those rooms smelled like. "Hope," her mother whispered, "and varnish." Liana played every day after school. Not for money, not for applause. She played because the air listened back. Lincoln Plaza had strange acoustics. The stone curved slightly outward. The fountain's mist hissed behind each note. When she shifted her bow a few degrees, the sound deepened. When she tilted her wrist just right, certain tones bounced back from the opera house glass with a second breath. She began to notice something. Some notes stayed. They didn't just echo. They lingered. Like the plaza itself was holding them in its palms. She started to draw. Not music, not notation, but shapes, waves, arcs, pressure paths. She sketched how the air seemed to bend when the E string rang sharp. She traced sound patterns inside her violin case, chalk lines drawn on the faded velvet interior. At first, her mother thought she was just doodling, until one evening, she paused to really look. The curves were precise, symmetrical, intentional. "What are you drawing, mi vida?" "How the E string bends the air." Her mother blinked, then nodded slowly. They lived 4 subway stops north in a rent-controlled apartment. The couch had broken springs. The window didn't quite shut. But the violin case had a place of honor. On the top shelf, wrapped in an old Juilliard sweatshirt her mother had found abandoned in a rehearsal room. On Liana's 13th birthday, her mother gave her a gift, a used college physics textbook from a thrift store. Inside the front cover, someone had scrawled, "Acoustics is physics for poets." Liana devoured it. She didn't understand every formula, but the diagrams spoke to her, especially one chapter on nonlinear standing waves. The idea that certain instrument shapes produced frequencies that didn't decay the way they should, that some echoes resisted dying. She looked at her violin case. "What if it's not the violin," she whispered, "but the box that carries it, that sings?" That week, she began experimenting. She lined the inside of her case with strips of copper wire, glued bits of felt where resonance spiked, repositioned the foam blocks. She wasn't trying to repair anything, she was listening. And slowly, the case began to sing back. Liana started to wake early. Before the plaza filled, before the subway howled to life, she opened the violin case slowly, reverently, as if she might scare the resonance away. The copper strips she had taped along the inner wall were cool to the touch. She ran her finger across the chalk lines she'd drawn. Still there, still true. She drew new ones. Circles intersecting curves, forming petals like sound blooming out. She noticed where the velvet had worn thin. That's where the resonance was strongest, where vibration had passed not just through string and bridge, but into the wood, into the lining, into memory. She played long notes now, drawn out. She held tones, Let them decay. But some didn't decay. Not in the way the textbook said they should. The textbook described standard wave decay like a lamp being turned off, a smooth dimming, logarithmic, clean. But these notes? They flared, dipped, returned. They echoed back with new harmonics. There was feedback, but not electronic. It was something else, physical, geometric. She flipped open the book to the chapter on nodal patterns. There were sketches of drumhead vibrations, string modes, flute cavities, but nothing like this. Not like the violin case, not like the plaza. One night, she turned the violin case upside down and knocked gently with her knuckle. A dull thud. Then she knocked again. Softer. Higher. A new pitch rang out. She repeated the motion in different spots. The case was alive with nodes. Liana began to map it. She drew a full-scale grid of the interior onto butcher paper her mother brought home from the supply closet. She marked zones with letters, cross-referenced them with notes. A worked tone in B4 meant a high-pitched pulse echoed best from the north corner. She didn't realize she was building a coordinate system until it was already there. That week, she brought home discarded foam from a packing crate, cut it into thin strips, and began gluing small pieces at angle intersections in the case. Not to dampen sound, to guide it. The goal wasn't volume, it was clarity. She recorded herself, just a phone app, then played it back. The sound didn't match her memory. The phone flattened it. But in the room, even their tiny apartment, there was a shimmer in the air, a presence. Even her mother noticed. You changed something. It's still the same notes, but they stay longer, like they don't want to leave. Liana nodded. She didn't want to say it yet, but she was starting to believe maybe notes didn't just decay. Maybe they nested, folded. She began to think not in sound, but in space. Her sketches evolved. She abandoned staff paper and turned to graph paper, then transparent plastic sheets. She overlaid wave paths, traced intersections. She made cutouts and rotated them. When shapes aligned, she circled them in blue. One shape kept reappearing, a curve that doubled back on itself, like a treble clef lying on its side. Not a standard spiral. It reminded her of a nautilus shell or wind curling around a stone. She wondered, could shape itself be resonance? Not just a container for sound, but a memory of it. Late one Friday evening, while waiting for her mother outside Juilliard, she leaned against the brick wall behind the building and opened her case. The campus was quiet. Her mother was still inside, finishing the recital hall. Liana tuned her strings. E, A, D, G. Then she began to play. A low, pulsing note. She bent it slightly, not with pitch, but with pressure. The tone responded like a ripple. She let it go, listened. It didn't vanish. It hovered. A door behind her opened. She stopped. An old man in a gray cardigan and thin-rimmed glasses stood in the doorway. He didn't say anything, just listened. Liana started to pack up. "Don't," he said. His voice was quiet, like the low register of a double bass. "Keep playing." She hesitated, then lifted the violin again. 3 minutes passed. 4. When she finished, the old man nodded. "That last note, what did you do to it?" "Nothing," she said. "Just held it. The case, it does something." "Your violin case?" She opened it, showed him the wire, the felt, the diagram taped to the inside lid. He stared. "What is this?" "I don't know. It's where the sound goes, or where it stays." He crouched, looked closer. Do you know what a resonance cavity is? A little. I read a textbook, but it didn't talk about folding. Folding? When sound curls back, when it won't leave. The man smiled faintly. What's your name? Liana. He held out his hand. I'm Professor Hirsch. I used to teach here. She shook it. That curve on the lid. You didn't trace that from somewhere, did you? No, I found it. It kept showing up. He nodded. It's a non-linear interference path. Most people don't see those unless they run simulations. I saw it in chalk dust. He laughed softly. Would you let me record your case? Not the violin, the resonance. Liana nodded. Her hands were shaking. Okay. And with that, a retired physicist and a girl with a chalk-marked violin case sat on the ground outside Juilliard, listening to silence, trying to hear where the sound went when it decided not to leave. Professor Hirsch didn't come to the plaza the next day, nor the next. Liana told herself it didn't matter, but the sound did. She kept hearing that last note she had played, still hovering in her memory, the way it bent back, as if space itself had sighed. It wasn't just about how the violin vibrated, it was about where the vibration had been allowed to rest. That Sunday she played with the case closed. Not out loud, not for people, just for the case. It was a strange practice. She would finger a note, imagine the resonance, and then feel for it. Not through her ears, but in her chest, her fingertips, her spine. She began to feel it in her bones, a low, tactile whisper like the hum of a distant subway. It wasn't performance, it was communion. She took notes obsessively. She diagrammed not only the shapes inside the violin case, but also the positions of nearby walls, corners of benches, even passing foot traffic. She was no longer measuring sound. She was charting absence, the parts of the world where silence wasn't empty, just waiting. One morning, while her mother was cleaning the back corridor of Juilliard's upper rehearsal rooms, Liana sat quietly in the corner, the violin case open beside her. She wasn't playing, just listening. She placed a small tuning fork on the floor and tapped it. The fork rang. Then something strange happened. The note vibrated more loudly a full second after it began. She tried again. Same result. She stood, walked 2 paces away, tapped it again. The delay didn't come. She returned to the original spot, struck the fork. The note bloomed again, with that same odd, late resonance. She turned it around slowly. Behind her was a curved corner in the wall, not large, barely noticeable. But acoustically, it was a lens. That night, Liana searched the thrift store physics book again. In a margin note beside a diagram of parabolic reflectors, someone had written, "Reflection is not a return. It's a redirection." She circled it in red. The next week, Professor Hirsch returned. He carried a small device with him, a portable analyzer. He looked tired, but also focused, serious. "I modeled your case," he said, after she finished playing. "Digitally. I tried to replicate the conditions. I got partial confirmation. But then I ran a model of the space around the case, your corner of the plaza, the angle of your bow, the pitch of your wrist. And that's when I saw it." "Saw what?" "A time fold." Liana stared. "In physics, there's a term we rarely use in public. Temporal recursion. It's mostly theoretical. But it means, essentially, that a waveform can loop not just in space, but in time. If the conditions allow for a tight enough focus, the echo doesn't just reflect. It repeats itself, inside the same moment." Liana blinked. "But how would that sound?" Like a note that feels familiar before you hear it. She was silent. You've been playing into folded silence, he said gently. You've trained your ear to hear an echo before it starts. That night, she couldn't sleep. She lay on the couch, violin case at her side, hand resting on the lid. A subway rumbled distantly below. A dog barked 2 streets away. But in the quiet between, she heard it again. That final note. Not as sound, but as shape. Memory. Presence. She sat up, opened her case, and began to draw. This time, not curves or spirals, but time itself. A series of connected moments, each bending slightly into the next, forming a ring. A harmonic orbit. She brought it to Professor Hirsch the next evening. He studied it for a long time. It's not a formula, he said finally, but it's grammar, the shape of a sentence. What sentence? She asked. He smiled. One we haven't learned how to speak. Liana looked down at her hands. My father, she said quietly, used to hum songs no one else knew. Sometimes I think he was hearing something before the rest of us could. Hirsch didn't respond right away. Then he said, You may have inherited his silence. She nodded. Then I want to give it shape. She began working every night. She used thread, pins, chalk, paper. She folded the diagrams, literally. Origami of time and tone. She mapped not just frequencies but entry points, where sound entered space and where memory held it. Hirsch started bringing her more papers. Old research, forgotten proposals. She read them like poetry, not math. She wasn't solving them. She was listening to what they had failed to hear. She filled a notebook. Then another. She stopped labeling the diagrams by pitch. She began labeling them by emotion. Sorrow, tension, waiting, release. Hirsch told her one evening, We don't name notes like that in physics. Maybe we should, she said. He didn't argue. One afternoon, while her mother wiped the baseboards of the recital hall, Liana sat under the back row of chairs. A violinist rehearsed alone on stage. Every note was clean, exact, but to Liana, they felt sterile, like notes on a page. When the violinist finished, Liana whispered, almost to herself, It's not about playing loud. It's about being heard after you stop. Her mother looked up from the floor. Say that again? Liana smiled. Nothing. But that night, she wrote it in red pencil inside her notebook. True resonance begins when the sound ends. She closed the case gently, and the silence sang back. The hallway outside room 308 at Juilliard was quiet that Tuesday evening. Liana stood just beyond the doorframe, her case in hand. She wasn't sure if she should knock. Inside, Professor Hirsch was arguing with another faculty member, an intense, sharp-voiced woman with silver-rimmed glasses. You're wasting time with shadows, the woman snapped. She's a street performer. You're projecting. She's hearing something we're not, Hirsch said. You mean she's imagining resonance because of chalk lines in a violin case? She mapped a harmonic echo inside a closed cavity with no amplification. You can't fake that. She's a child. She's a listener. The woman paused, then muttered, Fine, but don't drag her into a paper. It won't survive peer review. Hirsch said nothing. Liana turned and walked away. That night, she didn't draw. She didn't rehearse. She stared at the ceiling of their small apartment while her mother read in the kitchen. Her case sat unopened by the door. Rough day? her mother asked. Liana nodded. Someone said I was imagining it. Her mother folded her hands. Mi vida. Some people don't hear music unless it comes from a stage. Doesn't mean they're right. Liana looked down. I don't need to be on a stage. I know, her mother said. You just need them to listen. 2 days later, Hirsch slipped a folded page under her violin case where she played at the plaza. On it, a simple sentence. I believe your echo. And below it, a chalkboard diagram of a waveform folded back onto itself. She stared at it for a long time, then packed her case and walked to the basement rehearsal rooms, empty, dusty, half-lit. She set up her violin on a metal stand. Around her, old music stands, torn curtains, and the soft hum of pipes in the walls. Then she played. But this time she recorded it not on a phone, but on magnetic tape. Analog. Slow. Unforgiving. She wanted the imperfections, the wobble, the spaces between the sound. She played one note, G, low and round, and let it hang. When the tape was full, she stopped. She rewound it, pressed play, and listened. The note didn't come back the same. There was a second tone buried underneath it, a half-echo, a ghost. The next morning, she found Hirsch outside the library. I need to borrow your chalkboard, she said. He led her to room 112, small, dusty, unused. She uncapped a piece of chalk and began. She didn't write equations. She wrote time, arcs, memory curves, places where notes might bend backward. She drew 2 lines, then overlapped them. Adjacency, she said softly. Not in space, in emotion. She turned to Hirsch. You said we chart sound by frequency. But what if it's not about the pitch or the loudness? What if it's about what the space around it remembers? He stared at her, then slowly erased a corner of the board. Draw it again, this time as if silence were the sound. Liana smiled, and did. Later that week, while her mother mopped the grand entrance hall, Liana sat beside the vending machine outside the acoustics lab. Inside, Hirsch was presenting a paper draft. Other professors sat in a ring. The room smelled like old chalk and ambition. He clicked to the last slide. It wasn't a formula. It was a diagram. Liana's echo spiral. He didn't cite her name. He didn't have to. One of the older professors looked up. This is not conventional theory. No, Hirsch said. It's a listening method, not a solution, an orientation. Another said, You think this is worth submitting? I think, Hirsch said. We've spent decades looking at resonance as decay. She's showing us it may be recursion. Liana waited outside. When he came out, she didn't ask what they said. He handed her the chalk he'd used and said only, Draw more. That night, on the back of a cereal box, she drew a new curve, not one she had heard, but one she hoped someone else might. She labeled it, Belonging. The wind had a voice that week. It slipped through subway grates, rattled scaffolding, and made the plaza's fountain sing a new kind of hiss, soft but persistent. Liana heard it before anyone else did, not as weather, but as pitch, as vibration waiting to be answered. She sat cross-legged on the plaza bench with her case closed beside her. A page of graph paper fluttered in her lap. She had drawn a new sequence. Echo peaks stacked like mountain ridges, each one labeled not with notes, but emotions. Hesitation, breath, forgiveness. She had begun giving names to silences. They came faster than notes now. A footstep approached. Hirsch. "Do you know what day it is?" he asked.
"Thursday."
He smiled. "And?" She blinked.
"Acoustics lab day."
He held up a key. "Room 316. Big chalkboard." "And?" He pulled from his coat a weathered, leather-bound notebook. "It belonged to my mentor. She believed that the most important questions weren't asked in journals, they were drawn." Liana took the notebook, cradled it like a fragile instrument. Inside, diagrams, wave sketches, a few formulas, but mostly shapes. Curves that looked almost like hers. She touched one. She listened too. "Better than most," Hirsch said. "Let's go draw something." Room 316 had tall windows and soft dust. Afternoon sun made chalk lines shimmer like ghosts. Liana stood at the board and began tracing a diagram from her memory. 3 echo spirals nested inside one another, connected by small arcs. "She called this shape a chord knot," Hirsch said. "Not a sound. A condition." Liana nodded.
"I felt it when I played in the stairwell."
"Which one?"
"The one behind the costume studio. The echo there doesn't go up or down. It stays in the middle."
Hirsch's eyes lit up.
"A standing node."
Liana paused.
"You mean like a standing wave?"
He nodded. She stepped back.
"But what if it's not standing in space? What if the wave is standing in time?"
Hirsch blinked. "That's..." he began, then trailed off. "That's a kind of theoretical impossibility."
"But if notes can fold," she said, "why can't time do the same? Why can't a resonance come back before it finishes leaving?"
He stared at her. Then, without a word, erased the board. "Start over," he said. And she did. By evening, her diagram had taken up half the chalkboard. A recursive spiral, a mirrored node, a faint line that traced not a sound path, but a memory echo, forming a Mobius loop through resonance. Hirsch sat quietly in the corner, taking notes. Then he said, "What if this isn't a new sound theory?" Liana turned. "What then? What if it's an architecture?" She tilted her head. "Of what?" "Of belonging." She blinked, then smiled. That weekend, Liana returned to the stairwell. She brought a coil of copper wire, a tuning fork, and a single sheet of glass. She struck the tuning fork. The tone lingered. She placed the glass in a curve along the corner wall and struck the fork again. This time, the sound bent. It didn't bounce. It curved. She moved the glass again. Different arc. Same note. But now, the echo hovered. She placed her ear near the floor and waited. The note, now silent, remained, somewhere beneath hearing, a shape in the air. She whispered to the space, "You're still here, aren't you?" And the quiet answered. When she returned to room 316 Monday morning, a new message was written on the chalkboard in Hirsch's script. She doesn't just play notes, she locates them. Liana read it, then wrote beneath, "Notes are the shadows of listening." They left it on the board. That week, Hirsch sent a quiet email to an old friend at the Institute of Acoustic Design. Subject, proposal, echo forms in nonlinear listening environments attached, was a diagram. Liana's Mobius echo spiral. And one sentence, "I think we've been studying instruments. She's been studying the room." The rehearsal room had no name, just a faded metal number on the door, B12, and a door that stuck in the winter. It wasn't on any tour. No one played there anymore. The floorboards creaked. The mirror had a long, silent crack across its center. But when Liana entered, violin case in hand, she paused. It felt like a held breath. Her mother had once mentioned this room. It used to be used for private voice coaching until the ceiling started leaking. Now it just held echoes. Perfect. Liana set her case down. She didn't open it. Instead, she walked to the center of the room, clapped once, and listened. The sound bounced back. Not cleanly, but with delay, like the room had to decide if it wanted to answer. She turned in a slow circle. The resonance shifted. Some corners swallowed sound. Others curled it back. It wasn't a room. It was a maze. A memory maze. She returned the next day with chalk. Not music chalk. Construction chalk. The kind her mother used to mark baseboards. She traced outlines along the walls. Curves. X's. Arcs. Places where the silence stuttered. Then she opened her violin case and played just one note. The air trembled. Not loudly, but with weight. She recorded it. Played it back. Again, a second note appeared beneath the first. She repeated the process with a low A. This time, a triple echo, faint, like footsteps on carpet. Hirsch visited on Thursday. He walked into the room, paused, and smiled. This place shouldn't work. It doesn't, Liana said. But it listens. He raised an eyebrow. It hears. She nodded. Not just sound. It hears how I ask. She played a phrase. 3 notes only. Each one placed like a question. The room answered. She gestured to the mirror. Even cracked, it folds the note back. Not whole. Just enough to remind it where it came from. Hirsch crouched and examined the chalk lines. You mapped reflection points. No, I mapped memory triggers. He exhaled. This isn't just acoustics. Liana shrugged. I think music is where math goes to feel. That evening, Hirsch brought an old reel-to-reel machine. Heavy, analog, temperamental. He asked her to play the same note, E, high and bright, exactly 20 times. She did. Each recording was slightly different. But in playback, one note, the 15th, produced a harmonic overlay neither of them could explain. It shimmered. It sounded like memory. Hirsch froze. That note, he whispered. It isn't just vibrating. It's aligning. With what? With itself. Word began to spread quietly. A few grad students asked to observe. They didn't understand what they saw. One asked skeptically, "Where's the math?" Hirsch smiled. She is the math. On Sunday, Liana asked her mother for help. They cleaned room B12 together. They didn't repaint. They didn't fix the crack in the mirror. They left it the way it was. But now, it had purpose. They placed a small sign by the door, handwritten in chalk. This space hears. That night, as they left the building, her mother paused. I used to mop that hallway and never knew this room existed. Liana looked up. Maybe it was waiting for the right question. Her mother didn't speak. She just reached out and squeezed Liana's hand. The chalkboard in room B12 had grown dense with diagrams. Not equations, forms. Spirals nested within triangles. Arcs intersecting with forgotten staff lines. At first glance, it looked like the idle scribbles of someone who had spent too long alone. But look closer, and they whispered. Hirsch did, every afternoon. He'd come in, coffee in hand, sit on the third step from the back wall, always the same one, and simply watch Liana work. Some days she played, other days she drew. Most days she did both, switching between bow and chalk with seamless rhythm, as if they were extensions of the same question. One afternoon, as late autumn light filtered in from the basement window, Hirsch noticed something new. Liana had begun using rosin dust. She'd coat her bow, then tap the residue gently onto the chalkboard. Then she'd blow softly. The powder settled into patterns, swirls, lines, sometimes even clusters. "Why rosin?" he asked. She smiled. "Because it listens before I draw." He tilted his head. "Say that again." She shrugged. "If I blow it too hard, the dust scatters, but if I hum softly, it lands where the sound stops. It maps where the air gives up." Hirsch blinked, then laughed quietly. "You're not drawing sound. You're catching it." That night, Liana stayed late. Her mother had a second shift uptown, and the room felt unusually still. She sat cross-legged on the floor, her case beside her. Her notebook lay open, filled to the edges with new sketches. She began drawing not where the note was heard, but where it faded. Each graph was a time map, not a measure of duration, but of re-entry. Where and how a tone returned without being asked. She labeled one, grief. Another, turning. A third, simpler than the rest, just said, return. Then she closed her eyes, played one note, and waited. The next morning, a visiting lecturer, a celebrated name in acoustic modeling, stopped by room B12. He expected a gimmick. What he found instead was a violin case, open and humming faintly even in silence, and a wall of hand-drawn resonance loops that did something his simulations never had. They breathed. He turned to Hirsch. This looks like early wave compression data." Hirsch nodded. "It is, but from a child's memory." The man frowned. "You mean derived from emotion?" "No," Hirsch said. "I mean mapped from experience." He gestured to the board. "She isn't describing theory. She's archiving what the room felt." 2 days later, someone from the architecture department showed up. Then someone from neuroacoustics. Then 2 grad students in computational modeling. None of them spoke during her sessions. But afterward, they whispered, "Did she just bend a harmonic node? I swear that note split twice." "Where's the source code?" "There is none," Hirsch replied. "She's composing with memory." Not everyone approved. That Thursday, the head of Applied Acoustics confronted Hirsch in the hallway outside room B12. "She's not even enrolled." "She's working. She's experimenting without protocol, unreviewed, untrained. You're letting a child rewrite fundamental theory on blackboards meant for graduate research." "She's not rewriting," Hirsch said evenly. "She's revealing." "And what happens when your credibility goes with it?" the man snapped. "You've already drawn attention from the board." "Then let them listen," Hirsch replied, "if they can hear what she hears." The man left without another word. Inside the room, Liana had heard it all. She didn't cry. She turned back to the board and, with a single piece of chalk, wrote across the middle, "If the sound can prove itself, so can I." That Friday, a package arrived addressed to Liana. Inside, a small, polished wooden box. No note, no return address. She opened it slowly. Inside, nestled in velvet, was a tuning fork. Engraved along one prong were 4 words. "Where does silence go?" She ran her finger along the metal, then struck it gently. The tone rang out, and from across the room, The chalkboard dust stirred. The invitation came not in an envelope, but by hand. Professor Hirsch placed it gently atop Liana's violin case one morning before rehearsal. Folded in quarters, written in fountain pen on cream cardstock. Informal acoustics demonstration, Hall C. This Sunday, you're the final note. Liana blinked. I'm playing? Hirsch smiled. You're showing. The news traveled fast. A girl who'd never auditioned. A rehearsal room turned laboratory. A professor too old to care about tenure backing a theory built from chalk and intuition. By Sunday, the murmurs had become arguments. She has no credentials. It's not real theory. This isn't music. It's sentiment. A few faculty threatened to boycott. One wrote to the board. But the hall had been booked. The light crew had already rigged the soft blue wash Liana requested. And at 6:42 p.m., the doors to Hall C opened. Liana sat backstage, legs tucked beneath her chair. Her mother stood nearby, pressing the creases out of her daughter's dress with the edge of her palm.
It's too quiet, Liana whispered. That means they're waiting, her mother said.
Outside, the seats filled. Not with parents or students, but with physicists, musicians, acousticians, skeptics. Even the head of applied acoustics sat near the back, arms crossed. In the highest balcony, seat G27, a janitor took her break early. She had once mopped this very hall. Tonight, she watched her daughter walk out holding a violin and nothing else. There was no program, no announcement. Liana stood center stage, bow lowered, and simply waited. She tapped the floor once with her heel. A single, soft thud. Then she began. One note, low, drawn, held too long. The room responded. A second note, not from her, but from the balcony wall. A reflection. Soft, but intentional. She moved 3 steps left. Played again. Different echo. Each time she moved, the room's memory adjusted. The sound didn't bounce. It chose. The audience leaned forward, some confused, some awed. One openly scoffing. But then came the shift. Liana played a phrase she had never played aloud before. Return, the one she had labeled in rosin dust. A series of notes spaced wider than rhythm suggested. And on the final harmonic, the air didn't just echo, it pulsed. A shimmer passed through the hall, like breath through silk. The head of acoustics froze. He had heard that shimmer only once before, at his mother's funeral, when a cellist missed her cue. And the room sang instead. Liana ended with silence. She lowered her bow, let the room carry what it wished to keep, and then stepped back. No applause, just stillness. Then, slowly, someone in the back rose. Then another. No one clapped. But they stood, one by one, in silence. In the highest seat, G27, her mother pressed a hand to her mouth. She whispered, "You made them listen." Backstage, Hirsch waited. She handed him the violin. He held it like a relic and said only, "They'll never admit it, but they'll never forget it." Liana nodded, then reached into her case, pulled out a folded sheet of paper, and handed it to him. "Final draft?" he asked. She smiled. "Final memory." He opened it. One diagram. A spiral nested inside a waveform, and at the bottom a single sentence. I didn't perform. I proved I was listening. The morning after her demonstration, Hall C was quiet again. But the silence didn't last. By mid-morning, 3 emails arrived in Professor Hirsch's inbox, each colder than the last. The subject line of the third read, "Unsanctioned Experimentation Review." Liana was not named, but it was clear who the target was. By noon, an official request was filed to pause all acoustical activity in room B12 pending faculty oversight. The reason given, breach of protocol. Hirsch stared at the notice, then deleted it. He walked down to the basement, found Liana adjusting her bow tension. "They're trying to erase the chalkboard," he said softly. She didn't look up. "Then we draw on the floor." He almost smiled. Almost, but the backlash gathered weight. An open letter appeared on a faculty bulletin calling her work performative mysticism, non-peer verifiable, and dangerously romanticized. One graduate student anonymously posted, "No one with a violin and a flashlight should dictate academic acoustics." And yet, more students showed up. Not just musicians, architects, mathematicians. Even a senior physicist from MIT asked to audit her notes. Hirsch turned no one away, but he knew the tension was nearing collapse. Then came the summons. A private review panel. Monday, room 4C, 9 a.m. Liana would be asked to justify her presence, not her sound, her right to make it. When Monday arrived, Liana wore the same soft gray sweater she'd worn the night her father left. She never told anyone that. She entered room 4C with a small satchel. Not her violin, only paper. Inside were 6 professors. 4 she recognized. 2 she didn't. 1 typed as she sat down. Hirsch was not allowed to speak. "What is your academic status?" a woman asked. "I'm not enrolled." "What gives you access to these facilities?" "My mother cleans them." A pause. "And your training?" Liana opened her satchel, pulled out 6 pages, handed them across. Each page showed the same experiment in different spaces. A chalkboard, a tiled stairwell, a closet, a subway wall, a cello case lid, the empty rehearsal hall. Each had frequency maps. Each had measurable reflections, but all were drawn by hand. "None of these are machine verified," one professor said. Liana nodded. "Machines don't remember like walls do." Another. "So this is philosophy, not physics." Liana tilted her head. "It's both. I'm mapping what remains." One of them leaned forward. "Miss Granger, do you know what peer review is?" She nodded. "Then you must realize none of this qualifies." "I know." "Then why continue?" She paused. Then, "Because the room already answered. I'm just writing it down." The panel adjourned in silence. No ruling, no decision. But that night, room B12's door was found locked. The board wiped. Her rosin still sat in the tray. Liana said nothing. She went home, made tea for her mother, then unfolded new paper. She began drawing from memory the patterns of a room that had been silenced. She called the first sketch, Disappearance. 2 nights later, a visitor knocked on their apartment door. It was the head of Juilliard's experimental theory division. She held a folder. "This isn't an apology," she said, "but it is curiosity." Inside the folder was a proposal, an independent fellowship, 1 year, fully funded, no obligations. "Why now?" Liana asked. The woman hesitated, then said, "Because when you stopped playing, the room kept humming." That night, Liana returned to Hall C. Not to play, to listen. She sat in the last balcony seat, G27, the one her mother always chose. Below, the hall was empty. She closed her eyes, and in the stillness, she heard it, the soft memory of her own note, still choosing where to land. Liana didn't pack her violin for her first day as a fellow. She packed chalk, a small bundle of blank staff paper, and a folded letter her mother had kept hidden for years, from her father. She read it on the train to campus. If you ever find a place where the sound lingers after the music stops, stay there. It remembers you. She folded it slowly. Today, she would return to room B12. The door was unlocked. Inside, the board had been wiped clean. But the dust was still there. Liana ran her hand along the tray. Rosin still clung to the grooves. Ghosts of past equations haunted the corners. She picked up a piece of chalk, paused, then drew a single spiral. One echo, mapped in memory. She stepped back and waited. The first to arrive was Hirsch. He stood in the doorway, coat folded over his arm, and said nothing. Then came the MIT physicist. Then a violinist from Prague. Then a doctoral candidate in architectural acoustics who had flown overnight. They filled the room without invitation, not for a concert, for a silence. Liana turned, faced them, and finally said, "I'm not here to prove a theorem." A beat. "I'm here because this room let me ask a question." She lifted the chalk. On the board, she drew a memory spiral overlaying a pressure wave, not labeled, just traced. Then she added a second, slightly offset. She called it reluctant return. Someone near the back whispered, "That's impossible. Those nodes shouldn't overlap." They did. Word spread. That night, a camera crew from the BBC requested access. Liana declined. She had one performance left, the only one that mattered. It was spring. Juilliard's main recital hall shimmered with soft lighting and expectation. Rows of students, faculty, skeptics, and strangers filled the seats. On the balcony, one seat had been reserved. G27. Joanna Granger wore her cleanest blouse and sat holding a program printed on thick ivory paper. At the top, Resonance, a Memory of Echoes. Composed by Liana Granger. Below, one line of text. For the room that listened when no one else did. Liana stepped onto the stage. She held no sheet music, only her case, and a piece of chalk tucked behind her ear. She looked at the ceiling, where past performances still lingered like breath. Then she bowed, lifted the violin, and played. What followed wasn't a song. It was a reply. To every silence that had held her. To every floor her mother had cleaned. To every board that had erased her work, and every wall that had kept her echoes. She didn't play the loudest, or the fastest, or the most in tune. She played truthfully. Each note spaced like a memory choosing to return. When the final harmonic rang out, Liana lowered her bow and waited. The room exhaled, then rose. Not in ovation, but in stillness. 1,000 people, standing, not clapping, listening, letting the silence prove her. Later that night, as the hall emptied, Liana found her mother waiting backstage. Joanna reached out, held her daughter's hands. "You didn't just perform," she said. "You made space for the silence." Liana nodded, and for the first time in months, she wept. Years would pass. Her proof would be cited in a dozen disciplines.
still debated, still misunderstood, still unfolding. But in room B12, the dust was never fully erased again. Students left diagrams, notes, spirals, questions, and above the board a small brass plaque was fixed to the wall. It read, "This room remembered her, so we did too." In every city, in every hallway, there is a forgotten room. A room someone once cleaned while others composed. A chalkboard someone once wiped without knowing it held equations no one else could write. This story was never about genius. It was about permission, and how sometimes permission isn't given, it's taken gently, with care, by those brave enough to listen first. To the older readers who once asked questions and were told they were too late, I wrote this for you. To the mothers who worked behind closed doors so their children might hear a different kind of music, I see you. And to every forgotten room, thank you for remembering what the world tried to erase. May we all one day be brave enough to fold the silence and hear what's still echoing. The author.